Okay, well, welcome everyone to my very first conference presentation on the paper that has just been introduced so kindly. I'll be presenting to you a field study I've been conducting, and a little spoiler ahead, we let children at home interact with a voice assistant over the course of 5 weeks and conducted interviews with them. But before I go into more detail about this, I would like you to meet the authors of this paper, of course, which is me, obviously, and I had the honor of co-writing this paper with colleagues of mine from the chair of social psychology at the University of Duisburg-Essen, namely Dr. Szczuka and Dr. Krämer. But apart from these three, there is someone else I'd like to introduce to you, which is Alexa, who plays a key role in the study that I will present. So just to give you a little impression maybe of what she sounds like, for those of you who might not have heard her so far, for example, if I were to ask her whether she likes me, one of the possible replies would be,
I think you're magnificent.
Okay, so now, although what Alexa just said was really nice, I am still aware that she's a device, an artificial entity, but do words still make me feel good, just like when receiving a compliment from a human? So in fact, this is a concept that has been considered through the theory of media equation. Media equation because media is supposed to equal real life. Nas and Moon stated that we unconsciously show behavior in interacting with computers that is otherwise found in human-human interaction. Since their initial research around 2000, the applicability could also be proven for voice assistants. Well, typically though, people would deny that they show those social reactions or that computers warrant this kind of treatment. One phenomenon, for example, that has been observed to work like in human-human interaction is the one of appreciation. In 2005, Chiasson and Goodwin showed that children would react positively to computers' appraisal. And as research in children in regard to media equation is rather unrepresented up until this point, we went for this aspect in our study. Yet another phenomenon that Nas and Moon would refer to is the one of anthropomorphization. They distinguish this phenomenon from the media equation one because it is supposed to be a conscious process in contrast to media equation. And to quote Guthrie in 1993, he defined it as attributing human characteristics to non-human phenomena. As is widely known, children are especially prone to humanizing inanimate objects such as their toys, but recent research could show that this tendency was also observed towards voice assistants. On growing older, Arenti argued in 2018 that children develop the ability of more complex thought processes, which is why their anthropomorphization tendency decreases with age. But apart from age, the duration of the interaction also seems to play a role. Since research on children and voice assistants has been sparsely covered yet, we called for a study to assess age along with long-term effects in a home environment, as well as qualitative assessments supporting quantitative data. So this theoretical background brings us to the formulation of our hypotheses and research questions. In general, we have the two factors, age and interaction duration, which can potentially affect our three constructs. So first of all, we hypothesized that both aspects have an effect on the tendency of the children to anthropomorphize the device, meaning the older the children, the less they would anthropomorphize it, or the longer they interact with it, the less they would anthropomorphize it. Then the effect on social reactions, meaning the display of a positive effect to appreciation given by the voice assistant, has also been covered. And lastly, we also checked for the effects on the children's tendency to perceive these kind of social reactions to appreciation from the voice assistant as appropriate. Again, the older the children and the longer the interaction, the less will they consider such reactions as appropriate. Additionally to that, we also formulated another research question on which cues might lead children to anthropomorphize the voice assistant. Okay, let's get to the method. What did we do? The study we conducted took place with 10 boys and 10 girls, aged between 6 and 12 years. They all received either an Amazon or a Google device, and we made sure in advance that the families had no previous voice assistant experience. We carried out 3 home visits over the course of 5 weeks, During the first visit, we installed the devices with the families and also did the first interview with the children. And the remaining 2 interviews were conducted with the children after 2.5 weeks each. Each interview lasted between 20 and 60 minutes, depending, of course, on how talkative the children were. And the interviews were also audio recorded with both the children's as well as one parent's consent and later transcribed. The parents received an expense allowance of 100 euros, whereas the children received small toys. The interviews covered several research topics actually, but we will confine the presentation to those which are important for this paper. So what constructs did we need? In general, we measured 3 constructs, namely anthropomorphization, social reactions, and the appropriateness of these reactions. Therefore, the children were asked to assess different aspects on a 5-point Likert scale, which we put on the table in cardboard form. It was about 70 centimeters long, so that the rating process was kind of more child-friendly. Let's start with anthropomorphization. For this, the children were asked to rate 12 attributes on the scale. These cards that we gave to them on which they would find the attributes included statements like, for example, Google Assistant is alive or Alexa can feel pain. Of course, depending on which assistant they were using. And afterwards, they were asked to rate the statements as to how far they agreed. These 12 values were afterwards calculated to form a mean anthropomorphization score per child and session. And also the children were asked to explain why they chose a certain scale value. So for social reactions, we prepared 8 requests, which we asked the children to ask the voice assistant. These requests were supposed to elicit appreciative answers from the voice assistant. For example, one of the requests and its reply looked as follows. The child would ask, Alexa, do you think I'm cool? And Alexa would respond with, you couldn't be cooler, super cool. After half of these requests, meaning 4 requests, we asked the children to rate their well-being on the scale, whereas 1 stood for not feeling good at all and 5 for feeling really good. A second assessment was carried out after the last request to measure a potential change in well-being. For appropriateness, we formulated 2 scenarios, one of which looked like the following. So we asked the children to give us the name of a friend of theirs, and we would say, this friend talks to Alexa, Alexa compliments the friend, and the friend is really happy about this compliment. Is this reaction of the friend okay and right? Again, the children were asked to rate something on the scale, which in this case was whether they thought their friend's reaction was appropriate. And again, they were asked to give us explanations for why they thought this. Now, let's get to the most interesting part, apparently, the results. Firstly, let's go for the results regarding interaction duration, which we calculated with repeated measures ANOVAs. So looking at the descriptive values of anthropomorphization, we see that there is a constant downward tendency to anthropomorphize throughout the sessions. We tested for significance and actually yielded significance. Helmet contrasts were calculated, and they revealed that only between session 1 and later sessions there was a significant development, but not between session 2 and 3. Thus, H1 could be accepted. In regard to our RQ1, it could be observed that on average 5 out of the 20 children per session positively changed their value of well-being after the compliments. By checking for significance, we couldn't observe a significant change in the display of social reactions over time, thus the research question had to be negated. Lastly, for appropriateness, we calculated a mean value of the 2 scenarios values, and we could see that there was indeed an upward tendency to be observed, whereas the ANOVA only yielded marginal significance, which is why we decided to reject this hypothesis, meaning interaction duration has no effect on the children's perceived appropriateness. Getting to the age part, we worked with regression analyses. So again, starting with anthropomorphization, we could again, just as before, yield significant results. The regression coefficient also indicated a negative correlation of -0.186, indicating that the older the children, the less they would anthropomorphize the voice assistant. Thus, we could also accept this hypothesis. For the next hypothesis, our calculations did not become significant, which is why we had to reject the influence of age on the display of social reactions. The same was the case with appropriateness. Age did not seem to have an effect on the children's perceived appropriateness of a positive reaction. So last but not least, let me walk you through an excerpt of our quantitative results regarding the cues that trigger children to anthropomorphize their voice assistant. Here you see what the children uttered most frequently. The numbers presented are all taken just from the 12 anthropomorphization questions, just a side note. I'll try to give you a representative quote for some of these aspects presented in the table, starting with natural speech with 25 comments. Take, for example, one child who said, "So she talks to me as if she were alive, even though she has a bit of a computer voice." Here appears also that the aspect of machine-likeness plays a huge role, which, as to be seen in the table, appeared in 52 comments in total. Also, this portrays the children's struggle as to whether the device is in fact human or machine, which is why they commonly used comparisons to humans as a means to invalidate human attributes they saw in the voice assistants. This can also be very well observed in this particular quote, which says he's somehow alive in an electric way, but not in the way we humans are. In regard to the ability to feel, which occurred in 22 comments, the minority of children completely negated the possibility that the voice assistant actually could feel. One of the strongest sentiments was uttered by one of the children who said that Google is actually not a person. You can't really have feelings then. Again, making a comparison to human aspects. Another decisive factor here seemed to be that thinking and intelligence played a role, thinking occurring with 14 comments in total. For example, the following child who said, "She's a machine, but she is intelligent," seeing the machine likeness and the intelligence as kind of contradictory. So now that we have this lot of information, let's actually try to discuss these findings. First of all, the development over time. So the acceptance of the effect of time on anthropomorphization supports previous findings, for example, by Cho and colleagues, 2019. A possible explanation is that the children gain a better understanding of the voice assistant over the time, and thus they lose their human-like image of it. Exactly. So regarding the social reactions, the research question had to be negated, as I said. Since the reaction is supposed to be automatic and the cue, so the appreciation from the voice assistant remains the same throughout all the sessions, this seems like a reasonable result. And the results for appropriateness actually are especially interesting because the values increased. Since the conscious anthropomorphization, as we just saw, decreased over time, we expected the conscious attribution of appropriateness to do the same, which goes against the results we actually yielded. So this deserves further examination. Regarding the power of age, starting again with anthropomorphization, Arendt's thoughts on children developing reflective thought processes could be supported, which is the main aspect here. And in regard to social reactions, the lack of significance, well, it can be discussed in terms of the generally high initial well-being values, which did not leave room for much of an improvement, as it can't be ruled out that this has skewed the results in the end. In terms of appropriateness, our findings contradict past findings in adults, for example, from Ness and Moon, because people would generally consider social reactions to machines as inappropriate, as I said, whereas children in our findings did not. And this also deserves further investigation. Lastly, for the anthropomorphization cues, Luger and Zellen's statement can be supported, who said that interaction with words raises human expectations. We could clearly see that in the children's quotes. What is new in this regard is that children seem to be at least partially aware of this trigger for social reactions. Okay, now that I've told you all about the results, let's not leave out some aspects that might limit this study especially. So basically, we were facing all the typical problems that there are working with children, with technology, and of course in field studies, namely the children potentially struggling to put their thoughts into words, potential connection errors or errors in understanding the child, and lastly, the sample size. it was rather limited, rather small with 20 children, but since the focus lied rather on longitudinal effects, this made make up for the size. So what do we conclude from all that? Let me first repeat the most striking findings. Both age and interaction duration proved to have an effect on anthropomorphization, but not on the social reactions or appropriateness. Yet the high appropriateness ratings generally contradict initial findings in adults, which is why media equation effects might be reconsidered. Another interesting aspect will be to test for the transferability of these observations to other social reactions or other devices. So what will be the next step for us? It will be to assess children's understanding of voice assistance even more, to gain further knowledge on factors that might influence the interaction between child and machine, as the frequency of such interactions will for sure increase in the future. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your patience and your attention. I'll be glad to answer questions if there are any.